It's Pig Pro registered, so if anyone requires, it can go on their Pig Pro record. And if anyone has any questions, could you either put them in the chat box, which is on the top bar, or you can put your hand up, which is the also along the top bar. So tonight we have Neil Fedden, lean consultant and managing director of Fedden USP Limited, and David Childerhouse, a pork producer from Suffolk. David's on the Monitor Farm program, which is concentrating on lean consultants or lean management on the farm. So over to you, Neil and David.
Right, thanks, Pat. And firstly, good evening, everybody. The presentation, which I'll bring up now, is really just to give you a bit of an overview of what we've been doing with the SmartPork program, which is essentially running the lean management techniques live on farm with several pork producers, of which David's kindly volunteered to talk through his experiences of how it's worked from his side of things. So basically, I'll go through the theory, and then David will give you a little bit more updates on how he's found it. I mean, I'm always keen that it's very easy for a consultant like myself to put across what a topic's all about, but really, you guys want to hear it from people that have experienced it on their own business and get some real practical understanding of how it applies. So I'm sure some of you have joined previous presentations that we've done, and I think we always promise that what we do is through the SmartPork program, what we do is we give an updates on how things are progressing. So today's session, really just to give you a little bit of an overview, and then to talk you through what SmartPork program is, and then how it's been working out in some of the companies that we've been working with. David, do you want to just say a few words of introduction before we go through sort of like some of the lean slides?
Yeah, by all means, Neil. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, we're a weaner producer in South Norfolk. 9 people on the team. We're actually keeping our own grandparent stock now as well. So quite a complicated system. There's loads of space for error, I would say. Time lost in logistics, people moving around the site, everything we undertake. I'm under no illusions that there's a lot to be trimmed. Yeah, for me, this is we're at the early stages of it, but it's a saw sharpening exercise. That's what I call it. If you will cut the tree down quicker if you stop and sharpen the saw. I'm convinced of that. At the moment, it's stuff I'm doing, but the plan is to take it out to the team as well and get their input. And I think that's really important, that it's a collaborative process. But yeah, I'll jump in and out if I feel I can add anything during the presentation.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, so a bit about the business. As Patrick said, I'm a lean consultant, and we're on a lean consultancy. We've done work with quite a wide range of businesses. I think lean, those of you who've come across lean before, it started off in UK manufacturing, Japanese manufacturing, and then into UK manufacturing, sort of in the 70s and the 80s. And what since then, I think it's just become recognised as a general business improvement technique. So even though it's got its origins in manufacturing, we've done work with around about 150 horticulture and agricultural companies now over the years. With retailers like John Lewis. We do work in central governments, organisations like the NHS. So people now are recognising that this is a general business improvement technique, and you can apply it to any particular business. And the idea behind the SmartPork programme was to trial. We've seen it done in other countries around the world, but what we wanted to do is to trial and prove out the benefits of how lean could help the UK industry, UK pork industry. So I think we've got something like about 12 producers on the programme, We're taking them through over a period of 12 months. We're taking them through the theory of what lean is. And then more importantly, we're getting them to run projects on their own businesses and support them with on-site visits as well. In the past, we've done work with AHDB. We've been working with AHDB now for about 3 years. So we run a predecessor to SmartPork. We run the SmartHort program, mainly focused on growers, focused on fruit pickers and field veg crops. So looking at what we could do. The key thing with lean is really looking at where the waste is within the business process and looking at what could be done to reduce down the amount of waste, with the idea being that you increase productivity savings and productivity within those businesses. And I think that's really become crucial over the last few years with a shortage of good resources, being able to get the most out of the existing skills that you've got within the business. So by reducing down the amount of waste to increase capacity within the people that you've got within the business has become absolutely crucial. So that's been the big focus of what we've been doing in horticulture. And this is the savings that we generated during the initial cohort of companies that went through SmartPork 1. So from memory, without adding these figures up and embarrassing myself, I think it was something like about £360,000 worth of productivity savings per year across something like about 15 companies. So the savings were quite large savings across quite a wide range of different businesses, and that's what we wanted to try and replicate within the pork sector. So just very briefly, the background and the overview of what lean is. This is sort of like lean on a slide. This is developed from a book called Lean Thinking, which was written by some UK academics that went out to Japan in the 70s, in the 80s. They were trying to understand why the Japanese automotive industry was so much better than the UK automotive industry, why we were losing so much market share, why the Japanese could build vehicles at much better quality and lower prices than what we could do in the UK. And they discovered this management technique called lean. They came back and they wrote a book called Lean Thinking, a guy called Dan Jones and James Womack, and this was the fundamentals behind the book and the fundamentals behind lean management. And the first principle that they always talk about is, and whenever we go into a business, defining what the value is. So what are the activities that you do that add value to the actual product itself? So, how do you increase the value of what it is that you sell to your end customers? And in doing so, understand what are the activities that don't add value. So what are the things that simply add cost to the business? And we in lean, we have these 7 ways plus 1, which I'll take you through in a little minute, which are getting you to think through all the potential waste within the process itself and focus on eliminating those wastes so you can free up capacity to do more value-added activity within the business, with a hope that improves the productivity and the profit margins of the business itself. Second thing is understanding the value stream. So what is the process itself? What are the inputs to the process? How do you convert those inputs into the product, the finished product? And then how do you deliver that finished product at the right quality to the end customer? So one of the techniques we use, and we've been using with the SmartPork group, is called process mapping and waste walks, which is really understanding the value stream and understanding what could be done to improve that value stream. And the idea being that when you improve the value stream, what you naturally start to do is improve the flow of the product. So the product moves quicker, and the value moves quicker through the business. There's less waste, and therefore you improve the flow and move the value to the end customer within shorter time periods, or with increased margins within the business itself. Fourth principle, pull, which is essentially just in time. So it's all about delivering to the customer what the customer wants within the right time frames. And then the last principle is really continuous improvement. So a Japanese word for it is Kaizen, and it's all about getting everybody within the business. As David mentioned, it's a question of getting everybody trained within the business and getting everybody focused on looking at where the improvements are and what could be done to reduce down the waste with a view to improving productivity and increasing the flow of value through the business itself. And I'll talk through as we go through this what that means in reality. So this is basically lean on a page. These are sort of like the 5 core principles. And David, I know you were reading the book Lean Thinking. I remember very early on in the SmartPork program, you commented on it, on how you could pull out analogies between pork production and the automotive industry. Do you want to share those initial conversations?
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. I've become something of an audiobook junkie. So when this lean management thing came along, I asked Neil or one of his colleagues what's the best book I could read, so I understood the principle. And it was actually The Machine That Changed the World, which was the Toyota-based, focused on the Toyota production. And when you come at it from that point of view, if you understand a car going along a production line in a factory, you can, if mistakes are made on that car, when the car comes to the end of the production line, General Motors in America have a huge warehouse where they put all these cars with lots of things wrong with them, and people have to come in and strip engine parts away to try and solve them. But on a perfect Japanese system, there's collaboration all the way down the production line, so they make sure those things don't happen. Now I'm trying to produce at least a 7-kilo weaner, a strong pig for sale. And if we end up with a sub 6-kilo pig at the end of the production, it's too late. That input has to go at the front end of the process. That sounds really obvious saying that, but if you liken pig production to a car traveling through a production line, you'll kind of be where my head is. That's how I think of it. I've definitely been guilty of in the past of having 10-15% underweight pigs, and they go, "Oh, look at this fantastic facility I've got for my underweight pigs." And several years ago, someone said, "You want to take all that energy and put it in the front end and try and reduce the amount of small pigs you're producing." Again, these are obvious things, but this process is helping with that, and we'll probably get onto that a little bit more in a while with the probably with the fishbone analysis.
And I think what you said there is a common comment, and people say, I mean, most people that operate within any business, and particularly recently, are so focused on the task itself. They're so focused on getting the product out the door and satisfying what the customer is looking for. They tend not to stand back and look at what's going on within their own business and really analyse the process in the sort of detail that we do within some of the lean techniques. And people are often quite surprised when they do that, when they do spend the time standing back and looking at the process. They're actually quite surprised at what kind of waste they see within the operation. And I'll invite Patrick and AP in a minute to share some of their ideas and some of their observations from doing waste walks within businesses, the kind of things that they've seen as well. So it is quite a common observation that we get is that. I meant to say right at the start, if anyone has got any questions, I think where these kind of presentations work best is please do ask questions all the way through the presentation. Don't wait till the end. If there's any of the slides that we put up or any of the comments that we make, and you want to challenge them, or you want a little bit more detail, please put your hand up or put onto the chat, as Patrick said. And Patrick, if you don't mind, just keeping an eye out for that, only because when I'm doing the presentation, I can't always see the chat, and that'll be absolutely superb.
Will do.
Thanks, Pat. So I mentioned about 7 waste plus 1, sometimes written as 8 waste. When you actually analyse the process, when you do something called a waste walk, what you typically find is only actually a small percentage of activities are actually truly adding value to the products. Something whereby you're either providing feed to the animals or water to the animals. It's only actually a relatively small percentage of the overall time spent within the process, and the vast majority of the time is actually what we classify as one of these 8 wastes. And that could be transport of materials, It could be moving stock around, or storing stock, or buying stock in. It could be people walking around trying to find things that they need to actually do the job itself, or find access to equipment. It could be delays whilst people are waiting for instruction, waiting for decisions to be made, waiting for supplies to come in, waiting for availability of equipment. It could be overproduction, so producing more than what's required, going over and above the weight of what's required by the customer. Over-processing, so that's basically putting in more inputs over and above what's required by the end customer. Defects, so where the product hasn't met the spec and therefore requires some rework or some additional activities. And then basically, if you're doing any of the ones above, the eighth waste, sometimes written as 7+1, is you're not getting the most out of the skills and the talent of the individuals. If you're employing people to do any of these wastes, you're not getting the best out of the skills and the talent of the individuals that you've got within your business. So by the idea being eliminate the waste and maximise the resources that you have got available to you to do more value add. And quite often when it comes to when we're doing these kind of things and we're doing these kind of activities on site, what people often comment is that they actually enjoy the value added side of things, the things that cause frustration, the things that cause annoyance within the business and cause the stress levels to increase is when they're actually dealing with these types of waste, when they're dealing with these kind of problems. These are actually quite stressful to deal with. So, hopefully by doing this, by focusing on the waste, not only does it improve productivity within the business, but what it starts to do is make the job easier for the individuals that work within that particular process. And certainly in horticulture this year, one of the big things has been all about staff retention. How do we, there's not as big a pool of resource out in the marketplace as there always has been before in the past. So being able to recruit staff, bring them into the business, get them up to skills and get them up to speed as quickly as possible and then retain them within the business is absolutely crucial. And I think people that have been through the lean process start to understand and start to appreciate the impact it can have on making that process easier, so it's easier to bring individuals into the business and get them up to speed quicker. And this is your classic process map that we've been doing with the SmartPork group, and we do with any business when we go in there and we start applying the lean principles. And essentially, we walk through the value stream. So we walk through the process. We understand the yellow post-it notes at every single stage of the business process itself. On each of these yellow post-it notes, not only is a description of each of the different stages and the different activities, there's the distance and the time involved within that process. And then that starts to give us clues as to where the waste is. The green post-it notes are all the waste that's been identified, and the pink post-it notes are all the ideas that people have come up with of how they can actually improve that particular process. And then what we've got in this instance, there was a lot of data capture and a lot of data collection that was going on within the process, and we just took screen prints of all the data capture that they were doing, and what we were looking for is where there was opportunities to streamline the data input and make that as easy as possible and possibly reduce down some of the duplication. And AP, I know we did some work with you guys when we were doing a waste walk, and we were looking at this very topic of data collection and how we could simplify it. Are you okay to just add a comment on that work that we did?
Yeah, evening everyone. In the early stages of the program, the KE team were sort of involved in a bit of training to get our head around it, and we looked into industry where we just think out of our own experiences, where we got some, we could just easily work some examples on the board. And the prime example came from recording of litter details at farrowing. Most farms, or some farms, still they'll have a farm stockman book. They'll have a sow card above the farrowing crate. Then there'll be a neat sheet as well when it goes into the office, and then the neat sheet goes to the office to be put on the computer system, and then there's the queries come back and the to and fro and stuff like that. But we know, there's already been some examples of people seeing this and not knowing they were actually doing some lean thinking, with the evolution of EID tags and handheld readers and stuff like that. So it cut down that waste of multiple over processing, and also for those who have done a lot of sort of pig keeping experience, a lot of time is lost when you're sorting queries out from wrong IDs and stuff like that. So that was just one little example we came up with in the afternoon, and yeah, quite shocking really when you start putting numbers to it.
Yeah, thanks, AP. And I think that's, whenever we do this, the advantage of recording down the distance and the times on each of these post-it notes. What we then do with the group, and we normally do this as a group exercise with the people that work within the process itself, we start to go through and challenge each of these yellow post-it notes. Can we eliminate a step? If we can't eliminate it, can we reduce down the amount of time it takes? If we can't do that, is it possible to combine it with another activity? So you've got two activities happening at the same time, with the idea basically of being able to simplify and the process. And because each of these yellow post notes have got times and distances on them, we can then start to calculate what's the potential benefit of actually carrying out these improvements. So we can start to work out what's the benefit to the business in terms of the time that it's going to free up, and also what's the potential cost of the improvement. So before we actually start doing any physical improvements, we can do a very simple cost-benefit analysis, and this is what we're going to start doing with the SmartPork group. Do a very simple cost-benefit analysis to prove that it is going to make a difference. It's going to be worthwhile the effort. And
I would say, Neil, looking at that board, it looked very scary. But a lot of the processes we did on farms were a lot less exotic as that, weren't they?
Yeah, and it's a good point. Is that I find the biggest advantage you've got is if you pick a routine process. If you pick something that you do every day, or you do on a regular basis, because you do it so routine and you're doing it at a high level of frequency, they're the ones that have got the biggest opportunity for making improvements. And they tend to be fairly simple processes, so like the cleaning routines, movement of animals around the farm, the dairy feed process, the pig feed process. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The majority of ones that we've looked at have been fairly simple, routine ones. That
Neil, I think David's holding his up. I don't know if you can see on the screen.
I can't know.
It's just a nice simple one, just to illustrate the point. I don't smoke anymore, so it's not fag packet, but it is on the back of an envelope, and it led to a small investment, but ultimately saving us a huge amount of time. It was just regarding hopper filling. But they don't need to be massive and scary. If you pick a simple one to learn the process with.
That's brilliant. Thanks. Shit. What was the saving? Sorry, what was the improvement that you made on that?
We actually reduced down, rather than filling 20 hoppers every week, we filled 10 every other week. So we increased the capacity on the hoppers. So half the time and half the labour, a lot less running around. Yeah, that was the first one, and that was just one I plucked from the first exercise. So yeah, I could see the benefits immediately. Oh,
brilliant! And no, I think you're absolutely right. The simpler you can make this process of mapping out, of doing a process map, what it allows you to then do is every time there's a problem within the business, it's relatively easy then to get the guys together, map it out, understand what the issues are, and then get them to come up with, get them to suggest what they can do to actually improve the process. And by doing that, then they've got ownership of whatever that improvement is. We've literally done this on the side of buildings. On farm itself, just got the post-it notes, stuck them up on a piece of cardboard on the side of the building. Got everyone to agree what the process is. Quite often what you find is not everybody understands what each other's part of the process is. So by getting them together and mapping it out, everyone gets a good understanding of what each other's steps are and what problems they're having, and then get the group to agree together, your team, the small team, to agree together what is the improvement they're going to do. So these techniques are designed to be used very quickly to actually solve problems on a daily basis. And literally, we just use 2 different coloured post notes whenever we're doing this. So one colour for value add and the waste, and one for what we think a value added operation is. You know, that might be, I guess, David, in your instance, filling of the hoppers was classified as value add. The actual delivery of the feed itself, delivery of water, delivery of minerals. You know, they're the kind of things that are truly adding value in the process. The amount of time spent to actually get the feed and to transport it, and the amount of time spent trying to find the equipment and the machinery required to move feed, they're all classic non-value added activities which we're trying to minimise as part of doing this. And this is basically the mantra. So eliminate, reduce, combine, with the idea of simplifying it. So once you've mapped it out with the team, getting them to challenge every single stage of it. As I mentioned earlier, whenever you're doing a task, particularly a routine task, what happens is the waste becomes part of the job. You know, people stop seeing it. They stop seeing it as a problem. It's just part of the job. So it's only when you step back and you break the process down in into these individual steps, and you challenge each stage, that people really start to see and get a really good understanding of where the problems are within the process itself. And Pat, I remember on one of your waste walks was the one linked into one of the movements of pigs. What were some of the issues that you pulled out on that waste walk that you did on farm?
So they had to move lots of gates around, and we looked at it, and it was possible to store the gates in 3 different places and reduce the amount of walking that they did. And the other thing was they were writing on the barn stanchion with a bit of chalk, and where was the bit of chalk every time they wanted it? At the other end of the farm. So the simple answer was to put a chalk pen attached to 2 or 3 of the stanchions at each end of the unit. Simple things, really.
Yeah, and I think that falls into that category of continuous improvement. This idea of Kaizen, as I mentioned earlier, what the Japanese call continuous improvement. You know, the idea being it's lots and lots of small, simple improvements, almost on a daily basis, is where you generate the big improvements. You know, a lot of the improvements that you'll see within Lean, you know, we're not talking about big capital investment. The kind of improvements you can do quick and easy, like the one that Pat's just highlighted, that start to make an immediate impact. So this is why, going back last year, when COVID hit and there was a shortage of resources in a lot of the fruit pickers that we were working with, you know, the fact that we could make immediate gains, or they could make immediate gains by understanding where the issues were in the process, it really did help them out with the productivity improvements they were trying to make because of the reduced resources they had available to them. And you know, you'll generate lots of problems and lots of ideas. That's the main aim of what you're trying to do whenever you're trying to map things out. You know, it's getting people to almost actively look for problems within the process and look at what's gone wrong within the process. So rather than blaming individuals, it's this culture of, rather than just simply blaming individuals, and looking at it from the point of view of something's gone wrong within the process. What is it that we can do to fix that problem and ensure that this issue doesn't reoccur again? Because normally in business is what you start to see are the same problems reoccurring over and over again, to the point where people just work out workarounds of how to get around that particular issue. And the lean approach is to identify these problems and fix them so they don't come back again. And one of the ways that you can't fix every problem. And some of the problems that you look at, there'll be longer term issues that require quite a bit of input and possibly capital investment. So what we simply do is, once we've done the process map, once we've identified as many problems and ideas as possible, we just get a flip chart, a piece of paper, we split it up into 4. You've got easy to do, hard to do, low benefit, high benefit, and we take each of the post-it notes and the ideas, and we say, right, is this easy to do? Is it hard to do? Is it going to generate a low benefit or a high benefit for the business? Is it, for example, is it going to save any time? And hopefully what you end up with, and normally you do, you end up with lots of ideas and problems in this top category, which is the easy to do, high benefit, and they're obviously the things that we prioritise. Stuff that's hard to do, low benefit, probably never get around to doing. These are ones that require a bit of investment, therefore a bit longer term. These are ones that have got easy to do but low benefit. We put them as second priority because what we're always trying to do is encourage people to come up with more ideas. So we put it as second priority, therefore, to try and encourage them to come up with more. So if we act on these, hopefully that will give them a little bit of confidence to make more suggestions, and then hopefully from those additional suggestions is where the productivity improvement will come from. Is that everyone all right with that? Any questions at that point on anything that we've covered so far within the presentations? Okay, so one of the techniques we use, I mentioned about value stream. So this is a value stream mapping. Whenever we're doing improvements, we're always trying to link the improvements back to a metric. As David mentioned earlier, that might be looking at the small pigs and look at reducing down the number of small pigs and increasing the weight gain. So it might be that when we do the mapping, we start to put onto the process maps or the value stream map, we start to put on there the key metrics within the business. And then from that, we can then start to identify where the main issues are, and that's where we point our improvements to that part of the process. You're not going to be able to fix everything within the business in one go, so it's a question of just prioritising, and this is one of the ways that we prioritise. But almost more importantly, what that then gives us is some feedback in terms of the metric as to whether the improvements that we're identifying and generating is actually making a difference within the business itself. So this is this idea, one of the techniques we use is called plan, do, check, act. So you come up with a plan of how you're going to improve it. The do is you implement those ideas, and then the check is making sure that it's actually had an impact on the business metrics and the business performance. The act is, if it hasn't worked, going back around the loop again and identifying what can be done to improve it. Or if it has worked, how do we document that new way of working? So we make that the best practice, and we try to make it so that everybody works to the best practice method, and therefore there's no variation in the way that people are carrying out the process. So you tend to go around this cycle of plan, do, check, act several times. It's unusual that you solve a problem first time around. Normally it's 2 or 3 iterations of plan, do, check, act cycles before you truly solve the root cause of the problem itself, and you start to see an improvement in the performance of the business metrics, and the problem goes away forever. So this is really just reiterating that the value stream maps are visualising the end-to-end process, just linking the metrics to the actual improvement side of things, and just making sure that we've got this feedback mechanism to check that it's working. Another one of the techniques that we use, and David mentioned it earlier, is a fishbowl. There's simple techniques for solving problems. This is one that we use for trying to establish root cause contributions to problems. So a fairly typical one within a business is out of specification products. And then you've got 6 categories that potentially link into this problem. It could be something down to the equipment that you're using, the actual process, the way you actually measure the problem itself, the materials, so the input, the feed, the water, the minerals, down to the training of the individual, whether it's new staff that have come in, whether it's actually the best process is actually documented. So the environments, it could be down to ventilation, heat, humidity within the process itself that's affecting the specification of the products. And what you simply do, again, sticking it up on a flip chart on the side of a building, getting the team to identify as many things as possible as to what they think is contribution to this problem, and then getting the team to circle around what they think the top 3 most likely causes are of the problem, and then this is where you develop your action plan around actually fixing these particular problems. So again, another way of getting the team involved, getting them to think through what are the contributing factors, and then getting them to prioritise what it is they're going to work on to actually to fix this particular problem. And I know, David, you found this one particularly interesting, and you started to think about how you could use it on the small pig issue.
Yeah, we did, Neil, and you were kind enough to go through it actually in the session. But an out of specification product is for me a sub 6 kilo weaner at weaning, and it was quite simple actually to use this process to note down all the possible factors. There's an element to this, you think, well, it's obvious, and you've got to be a little bit careful not to leap to the conclusion that you think it is. It's important to go through the process, again, get everybody involved, so they take ownership of the problem. But you know, I keep saying it, but it does come back to that production line. If something's wrong along the way, your end product will be out of spec.
Brilliant, thanks, David. And I think you just mentioned it then about sometimes some of the solutions seem obvious. And I've been on a grower today, and the managing director, or operations director, I should say, he's identified a lot of the problems and the issues. But the issue is, and the problem he's found is every time he makes a suggestion of what can be done to improve it, he naturally gets some resistance from his team. You know, they always push back on him. Because it's seen as an idea that's trying to be imposed on the individuals. And a lot of these techniques, by getting people involved and getting them to see what the problem is and understanding a bit more detail as to why it's an issue, and then getting them to suggest what the solutions are, they almost feel like it's their solution at that point, and they feel like it's their idea, and therefore there's more chance of the solution being implemented and being sustained. If it's an idea that you've pushed and forced into the business, you run the risk that people will only work that way when you stood behind them, and you're actually, you know, you forced them to work that way. And as soon as you turn your back, they'll slip back to the old ways of doing things because they don't really understand the reason behind the solution itself. So, taking the time to get involvement and using these techniques, it just helps overcome that particular resistance that's fairly typical in most businesses and most individuals, to be truthful.
Neil,
yeah,
we've got a question for David. David, what did you identify as the main causes for out of spec weaners, and what have you done to address this?
Yeah, just seen that in the chat, Pat. It at the time it came down to provision of water in the last 10 days on the individual paddocks. So, I mean, the great thing about pigs is you get a chance every week to change something around and see an immediate result. So we had some long porridge troughs, which I'd grossly overpaid for in a sale a few years ago, and they were in the nettles. So we were able to bring one of those out and put between 2 individual paddocks. Relatively easy for the team just to disconnect a pipe and keep them full. And during those last few weeks of summer, we saw a tremendous increase in weaning weight.
Thank you. Back to you, I think, Neil. Or have you frozen? Neil? Let me see if I can get him to log back in.
I think he's frozen, Pat.
Yeah, let me see if I can get him to log back in.
Well, I'll just jump in and just make another point. I think, to be fair, I haven't done a huge amount with my team so far with this, is because I'm learning the process. I would like it to be a more of a collaborative process. But what I would say you need to say to your team before starting any process is ask them if they had more time, what would they do with it? Because if you do make significant time savings with this, they need to understand that that's not, okay, we all knock off an hour sooner. It's you have the time to start doing some things which will add to the continuous improvement. And I think that's definitely something that's a conversation you've got to have from the out. It's about continuous improvement across the board.
AP, have you got any more examples? I'm just trying to sort something out with Neil.
Yeah, just a couple of ones. I mean, as Neil said, we're only just got started in the process with a lot of these farms, and we've only done sort of little examples just to get everyone understanding and how to do the process. And just doing small things we found on farms have been quite, as David said, some of them are bleeding obvious sometimes, sort of thing. But the old favourite is things not put back. Tools in the workshop, muck forks, shovels, and brushes put back in certain places as well. That's one. And then there was one that cropped up the other week when I was on a farm, which I thought was quite an interesting one. And I know it's quite maybe a delicate subject to broach at the moment regarding the pig industry and staff and labour, but one of the guys was commenting when he came back from his weekend off how it maybe took him 2 or 3 days to get the farm house back on song again regards to feeding, and once he'd actually talked through the problem, he realized he needed to spend more time with the people who did his cover on the weekend to continue that even plane of feeding through the farm house and that, which I thought was quite interesting really. But I know, given we've got a lot of units probably understaffed and that at the moment, sort of thing, and struggling, but just one of the things that just cropped up out of a random conversation.
But if you're being super positive, Andrew, some of the basic ones I've gone through is precisely because I've been back to the floor in some instances, doing some jobs that I haven't done for a while, and that's where you really see where you could make some decent improvements. If you think, well, if I was doing this job, I would do it like this. Yeah, I certainly found that.
Yeah. And also, I think, like it has been said, a couple of times tonight already, it's getting that whole buy-in, because, if a job is done by different people at different times of the day or the week, and they all might have their own different way of doing it, how they think it should be done, or a better way to do it. And that's why it's important when you're doing the mapping that everyone has an input into it. So, think, well, I do it this way and I find this works, or well, you do it this way and I find that works. So it's really important everyone buys in. But as David said, you've got to get that understanding engagement from the whole of the team, because there might be a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to think, well, I'll be either finishing earlier or I won't get as much overtime and things like that. But in this day and age where we're looking to improve sort of staff retention, if I want for a better word, if they can get home more regular at a better time of the day because you've improved some processes on the farm, well, surely that's a win-win positive situation.
Yeah, I think that's the way you've got to look at it.
Is that a direct question, Anne, or just to David or myself? No, to all. All right, okay.
Yeah, no comment.
We've got Neil back yet, Pat? Oh, sorry, is Anna back?
we'll wait and see what Anna's. Oh, hang on.
I mean, just while we're waiting for Neil to come back, I mean, just bridging on that comment there that I've just made. I've been a stock person, and I have worked on a farm where it was incredibly important to keep the farm tidy, to keep it clean, routine, dusting, cobwebbing, you name it. And we as set departments we were all set challenges, and if we reached all those challenges and we completed the tasks and we did a little bit extra, we got rewarded. Now that could be a chippy on a Friday, or it could be, offering to put somebody through. At the time, it was the BPEX courses back in my day when I was on the farms. It was little things like that. So like making your staff feel like they're worth the input will make them want to do more things on your farm.
Yeah, I do remember the Chippy Friday day used to be popular, sort of where I used to be, sort of thing, like, and yeah, Chippy day, and sometimes just bringing some cake in, a bit of cake and food, buns, especially when the weather's really bad, sort of thing, especially for the outdoor people on the call. When I used to run outdoor units, if you come in with a load of bacon butties in the middle of the morning, like in the morning break, it really picks people up, sort of thing, And sometimes it's not all about the financial stuff; it's the little stuff, that understanding that person, So yeah. Anyway, got Neil back. Back to you, Neil.
Yeah, apologies about that. It's Wi-Fi happened just in the middle of the presentation. So, yeah, I mean, I've been through the majority of what I wanted to cover. Really, there's just a couple of case studies which will pull it all together and just illustrate the techniques, how they're used within a live business environment to solve a particular business problem. This one was on a poultry farm. They wanted to improve productivity of the tipping process, so basically when they get the young chicks in and when they actually tip them into the breeding sheds. So we used, and this really illustrates what we're saying earlier, this was the tipping process, so relatively simple process, not that many post-it notes. This is the problems that they identified as they mapped it out, so understanding of where all the issues were, where all the waste was. You have the distances and the time involved within the actual process itself. We do a thing called a waste walk. This is one from a dairy farm. So this is what the guys on SmartPork have done. And what it does is it breaks down all the steps involved in a fairly routine process. This is basically cleaning out on a dairy farm. We've got the time taken to do the activities, the number of times per week that you do that particular activity, and then basically how much time is lost. And then from that, the main thing is to try and identify where there's opportunities for improving things. So basically, people walking around trying to find the equipment. So a lot of issues were associated around that. Basically, people over-processing, but doing much to clean the beds, going over and above what's actually required. So it's a real neat way of just identifying where all the problems were within the actual activity itself. On the tipping process, when they did their waste walk, what they identified was the amount of time it took to put this polythene sheeting down, which basically contained the chicks and got them onto the feed and to the water as quick as possible. And basically this polythene sheeting was rolled out. It took about 30 minutes to put a line of polythene sheeting down. And what they wanted to try and do was to reduce down the time associated with that. So somebody had an idea and a suggestion they wanted to trial, which is basically to put down some egg belts. And the idea being is that this could be reusable, so you could simply lift it up once the chicks had got to the size where they could actually spread across the shed itself. But what they actually found by using this egg belt, not only did it save time, but it actually started to improve the ventilation. And it didn't make as much noise as the polythene sheeting. So when they were actually using this, it prevented the chicks were being attracted to the noise in the previous way of doing it. And therefore they were losing chicks around this particular area. What they found with the egg belt, they were getting better ventilation. So there was less chance of losing the chicks, but also they were starting to get better weight gain. So going back to what David was saying earlier, the key metric they were looking for was how do we improve the weight gain of the birds, so that way we could get them to the target weight in a shorter lead time, and then that way we could improve the profitability of the business. So there was almost like an additional benefit that came out of this, an unintended benefit, which was the improvement in the weight gain, which equated to £200,000 of extra margin within the business. So quite an unexpected one, but a very welcome benefit. And normally what we do when we're coming up with improvements like this, we trialled it in one shed. We proved that it worked. We proved that it was possible to operate this way with no detrimental effect on the chicks themselves. And then once you've proved it worked in one shed, they then rolled that out across the rest of the business, which is where they got the 200k savings was rolling out across the full length of the breadth of the business itself. And then the benefit of time saving as well. So the extra capacity that it freed up within the process. I just walked in, as I joined again, I joined in a conversation about keeping the areas as tidy as possible. In this particular farm, there was a bit of an issue. We're trying to find the equipment we needed to actually fix tractors and fix capital equipment. And on the right-hand side are some of the examples of what we've done within manufacturing businesses to reduce down the time spent looking for equipment that's needed. There's a technique that we use, workplace organisation, sometimes it's called 5S. So it's trying to reduce down the amount of clutter and just trying to improve the organisation so you can reduce down setup times and maintenance times on equipment. This is another example. I'll quickly just go through this. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this one. But this is from a cereals farm and dairy farm. So same thing, maps out the process, identified the issues, thought about how we could redesign it, cost benefit to prove out the ideas that people were coming up with had been worthwhile doing, and then come up with an action plan of how to implement the improvements. We did a thing called a string diagram. So we simply took a layout of the business itself, the farm. So this is the dairy food routine, so feeding the actual cattle. And then the red line indicates the movements involved in this particular activity on actually collecting the feed, collecting the minerals, and then delivering them to the different cow sheds to actually deliver the feed. And then from this, we started to identify that possibly the mineral feed wasn't in the correct location, and there was a shed over this side which possibly we could relocate some of the cattle closer to this side and therefore reduce down some of the extra movements that were involved. And it's only when we did this that they actually started to get an appreciation of just what sort of distance that they were travelling every single day to carry out this particular routine. So that's the process map on the left hand side, and this is where we're getting the team members involved in doing the process mapping itself. This was the waste walk, where we'd started to identify the issues. So these are all the steps involved within that process. So collecting the JCB and collecting all the different feeds and minerals involved in carrying out the activity itself. And one of the things that started to come out of this quite quickly is that the bucket size that he had wasn't correct. They're doing far too many trips because the bucket was too small. So straight away they could actually calculate what the cost benefit would be on actually buying a larger bucket to reduce down the number of trips involved. And I think they were quite surprised when we actually started to measure it, like 3.5 kilometres and 2 hours every day within this particular process. I think everyone was quite surprised what was just involved in doing it. These are all the issues. So we got the team to identify all the problems within the process. Some fairly simple ones, like there was only one key for one of the sheds that they needed access to. So they were spending a lot of time trying to find who had the key. The amount of time spent swapping over between the shear and the grab bucket, and one of the suggestions was, could we buy a combined one? the amount of time spent getting in and out of the cab to look at weigh scales. So relatively simple problems that occurred on a fairly regular basis. And as I mentioned earlier, we took all of these problems, we put them through this prioritisation matrix, trying to find as many easy things to do that generate high benefit and time saved for the business itself. And then this is the action plan that came out of it. So as mentioned, do your bucket, cost £1,000, but save something like 30 hours per year. Therefore, a simple decision can be made: is it worthwhile doing? They'd also discovered that the balance of work between the morning and afternoon teams wasn't quite right. So what they actually started to do was rebalance some of the activities. I think the morning shift were a little bit quieter than the afternoon. Sorry, the other way around. The afternoon shift were a little bit quieter than the morning shift, so they redistributed some of the daily tasks so that the afternoon shift had a little bit more work to do, but that took some of the pressure off the morning shift, so they could carry out their activities in a shorter lead time. And then I mentioned down the bottom, they only had one key, so absolute no question about it. It didn't cost a great deal of money to do, but saved a chunk of time for some key individuals within the business and getting another key cut. And the key thing behind this, going back to what we talked about, value. Ben Jeans is the owner of this business, and we'd identified that we could save 85 hours of his time by doing this, and he wanted to spend more time thinking about the future of the business. And he said very early on he didn't have time to spend about thinking about strategy and how they were going to develop the business itself. So that 85 hours, he wanted to implement the improvements so that they can actually use that time to think about strategy and think about the longer term development of the business itself, things that traditionally didn't have time to do. So that's the main value that they wanted to get out of this particular activity. And as mentioned, just some of the things that came out of it. So they looked at a larger bucket. They also looked at a bale splitter and unwrapper, which saved a chunk of time. And then one of the other activities they're looking at is buying in some of the chemicals. This is on the cereals side, if I remember rightly. We're looking at buying some of the chemicals in using IBCs to just reduce down the amount of handling of plastic and plastic containers. So hopefully that brings it to life a little bit, some practical examples, and also illustrated as we've gone through some examples from the pork industry. David, anything to add? I mean, I've covered everything I wanted to cover in terms of the presentation. Is there anything more to add from your side of things?
I don't think so, Neil. I've sort of thrown in a few examples as we went through. We covered off this sort of the unsaleable pigs. No, I just invite any questions.
Neil, one of the comments I've had from 2 or 3 of the other monitor farm producers is that it sort of revolutionised the way they walk around the farm. There, and I don't know whether you'd say that was a good or bad thing because they're not doing the whole process, but it's made them look differently at every job they do.
Yeah, again, that's a fairly common feedback we get. Once you start to see the waste, you can't unsee it. People call it learning to see. You can't unsee it again. It's very visible at that point that you've done a waste walk. And this is the great thing about getting people to training them up so that they can see it themselves. Sometimes I think managers are quite frustrated because they can see the problem, but nobody else can. So having more members of staff that can actually see these issues, that can then start being motivated to do something about it, it takes some of the pressure off the management team and just shares out that workload for carrying out improvement activities. So yeah, that's a fairly common comment that we get. I think I've mentioned to you before, I've got to the stage now where I can't even sit down go out for a meal with my wife, and I look at the process when we're in a restaurant. I'm even analysing the process of how we get served with food and thinking about ways to improve it. So, once you start to see these issues, it's very difficult to unsee them.
And I think the other fairly common comment was when we've looked at things is, well, we've always done it that way. And they've just not really actually sat and thought about why they're doing it that way, but it's just the way they've always done it.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes you find that the reason why it's always been done that way is because there were constraints on the process, or constraints on the business at a particular time, or a piece of technology wasn't available. You know, for example, barcoding or tagging, like you guys have been doing. And now that technology is available, and now it's readily available in terms of cost, and it's a proven technology. Therefore, those constraints that have always been there, that people have assumed have always been there, are actually not there in reality. So by regularly going through and challenging every process, and just challenging, is that constraint still viable, you know, really does get people to think differently about how things can be done, and possibly some of those where things have been done for years is no longer a valid reason for doing it that way.
Yeah. Has anyone else got any questions for Neil? If they think of any in the next 20 minutes, we can come back. So in that case, we'll go over to Bethan Wilkins, AHDB's pork market analysis. Over to you, Bethan.
Hi everyone, so I'll just share my screen so you can see my slides. Hopefully you can see slides now. That would be good. Yeah. Okay, so in the next, say, 10-15 minutes or so, I'm going to run through the market situation at the moment. Obviously, this isn't maybe the most cheerful task or times I've ever done this, but we're going to go through why it is so difficult at the moment, and what it looks like we might be seeing in the next few months going forward as well. So our figures at the moment that we produce estimates for producer margins from farrow to finish, and based on these estimates, it does look like we are seeing the worst period of profitability that we've actually got on our records, which go back to 2009 when we started to do this analysis. So the evidence is there to show that this is one of the most difficult financial periods that we've had in the industry. Oh, apparently the presentation has disappeared. Do you see it now?
No, not yet.
Hang on. What about now?
Yes.
Yes. I'm not too sure why that was. Interesting. Let's see if it does it again. Anyway, so margins not good, and the main reason we've got for this is that the feed price is so high, and the feed costs have been rising, as you can see, going up quite substantially, and this is the main driver of the poor profitability that we're seeing at the moment. It's not so much that the pig price is particularly low. Actually, if we look at the pig price for much of this year, we've been above average, and normally the prices that we've been seeing we wouldn't be particularly unhappy about, and they would enable us to achieve some level of profitability. It's really the feed price situation that has been a challenge up to this point, though now we are starting to see more pressure on the pig price itself too, which we'll come to a bit in a few slides time. But so far, really the challenge has been around the input costs. So if more analysis on that would come from our cereals and oilseeds team, I really just look at the pork side of things. But you know, clearly we've got rising wheat prices, and they're likely looking like they're going to remain on the strong side going forward too. Tight supplies in most of the main exporters of that, and reasonably strong demand as well coming from Asia. And so with that going forward, the likelihood is that the sentiment there is quite bullish for the wheat prices going forward. So not looking like we're expected to get too much easing on the feed price, which is obviously a difficult situation ongoing there. And then looking at proteins too, soybeans again, those prices have been strong. And although I think there is some expectation that we may get some better yields for soybeans this year, still we're facing an ongoing strong demand for China from that. And so again, no real strong signs that that price is likely to weaken. So with all this, you know, clearly there's pressure from the producer side that we're looking to get really sort of stronger prices from our pork if we're looking for a profitable situation at the moment. But the market for the pigs is looking like it's going to struggle to deliver a price that is strong enough with the level of demand that we've got for the pigs at the moment to be able to enter a sort of profitable situation in this sort of short to medium term. So quite a challenging situation, driven particularly by these high feed prices for the next few months at least. So coming now on to the pork side of things then, and where the balance is for our market from that perspective. So far this year we've had higher production of pig meat, and there's been a few reasons for this. Coming into the start of the year, we did have pigs rolled from 2020 when we last faced difficulties with processing capacity. So we do have some of last year's pigs in there. And with that, we've had higher carcass weights, which have really been a feature for much of the year. And of course, that's added to the extra production. On top of that, we do think that last year we had some overall expansion in the number of breeding sows. And of course, that feeds through into the number of pigs coming through. And again, that's been another factor that's boosted slaughter availability. And that's something we've continued to see even in the third quarter and still to some extent now, although, of course, now with challenges around profitability, we would expect that to be coming back eventually. But that has still been an influence so far. And another factor really has been, it's been that in previous years, when I've had discussions about doing forecasts on pig slaughter numbers, there's been a lot of comments around people facing challenges with the herd performance and disease levels. Now, last year when I came towards the end of last year, when we were starting to do these forecasts again, those kind of comments were much less frequent. So perhaps it also seems that some of the productivity has been maybe greater than what we expected. And although the AgriSoft figures maybe don't always follow through on that, of course, they're not representing the entire industry necessarily, but I do wonder if we've had some pockets of extra productivity too, which has also boosted the number of pigs coming through, and we've had perhaps more available than we would expect, particularly recently, which has been contributing to the challenges we've seen. Now, with this higher production, we've also seen that we've had difficulties with the export market, both from a Brexit perspective in terms of supplying the EU and logistical challenges there, but also with regards to China. Some of our plants have had problems with COVID and therefore not been able to export product to China. And also we've seen that the Chinese demand itself has started to fall back. So those two factors combined have clearly impacted our export volumes. And so with higher production and lower exports, we've had more British meat on the market. Unfortunately, for much of the early part of the year, we had that kind of worked in the market's favour, because we were seeing much more product going through retail, and that is more of a favourable market for the British product. But of course, as we're coming later in the year now and the COVID restrictions have eased, we're starting to see growth in food service again, and some of that demand for it was going through retail is now back in food service outlets, which generally are not as interested in the provenance of the product. You don't see things labelled as British so much through sort of like when you're buying a takeaway sausage roll and things like that. So that's less favourable for the British label. It's less able to attract a premium for that product. So that's not such a good feature going forward. So far, we've seen quite a big drop in imports in order to balance the market, because we've had this higher production and lower export volume, meaning we've got more British on the market, and that had been working quite well. But now, as we're coming later in the year, and I say we've got more food service demand again, whether we continue to see that lower import level is more of a question, because we're seeing the avenues where that import would traditionally be much more competitive starting to liven up again in terms of volumes. So although the market has balanced quite well with a drop in imports previously in the year, whether we continue to see that it's as easy to do that in the latter part of the year, I think is more of a question. And this is why one of the reasons why we're starting to see that downward pressure on the British pig price at the moment. So I'll just go through that in a little bit more detail now. Here you can see the UK slaughter numbers for every month so far this year. As you can see, despite what we're obviously hearing and seeing with problems in terms of some producers at least not being able to get their pigs away when they want to, actually the slaughter level is not particularly low. If we look at July and August, so some of this is to do with the number of days in the month. So August is not really higher than August last year. It's about the same. It's just got an extra weekday in it, which of course means you get a boost in slaughter. But across July and August, really the slaughter number is similar to last year. So although yes, of course, we've got problems with pigs on farm, which suggests that there's a constraint on capacity, it's not really the case that we're killing fewer pigs. It's the case that we've got more pigs that we want to kill, and we don't have that wriggle room in the capacity because of the difficulties we've got with labour at the moment. And this has come from a combination of COVID. We've got staff wanting to go and Brexit. We've got international staff wanting to go back to see families that they've not been able to see abroad and taking extended breaks, perhaps leaving permanently in some cases. And this is compounding a challenge that we've seen for a long time really with staff issues, and obviously now it's come to a sort of a peak around this summer. Also on top of this, previously we've perhaps got away with some difficulties around butchery staff level, because in the past couple of years we've been able to send minimally processed carcasses to China for quite a good price. Whole carcasses, sort of just 6-way cuts, able to be sent in a box off to China, and you get quite a good price for that. But now, as I've already mentioned, some of the plants don't have the access to do that. And even if they did, the market price there is not as good as it was. So that, whereas we may have got away with fewer processing staff available because that was a product that didn't really need much processing, we now don't really have that option so much. So we're having to do more processing on the cuts to get them suitable for sale in Britain or Europe or other markets like that. And this sort of highlights the staff issue that maybe hadn't been able to come out so much in the past because we'd had other options that were easier for that meat. And although maybe we've got some other markets that we can use sort of whole and minimally processed carcasses for, like the Philippines, that's a much poorer market than China, and so the price you might get for that product is much lower. And so if we're going to be doing that kind of work in order to move pigs through, which is something that we're obviously looking to do, the price that is achievable for that is much lower and is going to be reflected in the price that we would get for pigs that were destined for that kind of market. So here we can see the carcass weights, and as I mentioned, we've had very strong carcass weights this year, early in the year, following from difficulties with the backlog at the end of last year. And again, now, obviously, we've seen them escalate again as we've once again seen problems with pigs backed up on farm, unable to move away. And this has really been the key evidence we've got for problems with backing up on farm at the moment, because that slaughter level is not particularly low. This is the main evidence to show to government and to others, that are looking, when the MPA are trying to get support from the government and other agencies, that this is the main evidence really that there are pigs backed up on farm in terms of hard numbers, because you can see here that the carcass weight has really escalated quite quickly, showing that there's clearly a problem with getting the pigs away, and of course that compounds the problem we have in terms of processing, because it's difficult to risk of breaking the line and things like that. And then also it's obviously more of a challenge with saleability of the product. For example, the cuts become too big to go into into the retail packs. And so, you know, we know that when they get bigger, they become more of a challenge to deal with. And again, in the past, we might have dealt with that by sending the product to China, but now that's become more difficult too. So, you know, this is obviously a challenge we face at the moment. Looking here then, this is how the exports have been performing. As I've mentioned, it's been not a particularly great year from both a Brexit and a China perspective. We've obviously been utilising this product in the UK instead, which is favourable in many ways. But as we're coming now to see more food service demand, this is more of a competitive market. And so whereas we may have been getting a good price for that through retail, it's more challenging when we see more competition and we're going through more competitive routes and places where we would see more European pork. Normally we would be expecting to get price pressure there for the British product because it doesn't have such a you know, provenance of importance there. So I've got some figures here to show you how the Chinese market has become more challenging. You can see that our exports have fallen away a bit recently. And this is the actual Chinese wholesale price for pork. So that's not for UK pork, that's for Chinese pork and the pork they're selling in China. And you can see that it's been really high for a while now because of the African swine fever problem. But now it's really dropped back. So obviously a key question here is, why has this happened? And to be honest, there is some uncertainty about this in the international pork analyst community. To some extent, it's going to be because of their recovery from African swine fever, and this is certainly the message that the Chinese government is trying to put out. And yes, there has been growth in the Chinese sow herd. So yes, we do have a situation where they are starting to come back from the difficulties they've had, which we always knew was going to happen to some extent. It was just a question of how long the sort of Chinese bubble of great pork demand and high prices lasted. However, the extent to which the prices have declined and the speed of it has caught a lot of us by surprise, really. And there is also a lot of discussion around the extent to which the drop is due to people having to cull out pig herds because they've either got African swine fever, they're nervous about getting African swine fever, or they're facing other disease challenges. And then when the price starts to fall, this also affects the profitability of Chinese pig production, which has a high cost of production. And again, then if we're seeing poor profitability, whether that's then leading to extra pigs being culled out too. So of course, if we're getting people rushing to slaughter pigs, then that would lead to quite a sharp boost in the amount of pork on the Chinese market. But then in the longer term, that's sort of like a short-term effect, and we might see a bit of adjustment again. So there is some thought that perhaps they've sort of there's been a particular spike in the production of Chinese pig meat recently, and you know, in the medium term, maybe around start of next year, we might start to see a bit more of a shortage again. Perhaps start to see some return to growth in the Chinese wholesale pork price, and also some uplift in their import demand, which would obviously be of great interest to us and to other exporters. But it's really unclear as to whether this will happen. I think there was originally some thought that we might see improvements in the Chinese price as we got towards the end of this year, but we're in October now and it hasn't happened yet. Or whether we might see more improvement next year. So there is some optimism here that the situation is particularly challenging at the moment with China, but it may offer some improvement. But I think it would be unrealistic to expect it to get back to the heights it was at before. But potentially we could have some improvement there going forward. This is just to highlight that obviously it's not just the UK that's faced some difficulties with exporting to China. The EU market clearly is too. And even more so really for the EU market because they're net exporters. So they're really reliant on having that export market for meat. And as it's come back, this is really the key reason why we've been seeing such a decline in EU pig prices recently, which is leading to we've got more pork on the European market, and we need to stimulate demand for that. So, in the past couple of years, we've seen pork being sort of withdrawn from the European market and sent to China instead, because the demand and the price was so good there. And now that's not there so much. So it's still in Europe. And in the past, we had eaten this volume of pig meat before. We can eat it, but it's a question of at what price. And we're having to see quite strong price declines in Europe to stimulate that demand for pig meat. And the commentary at the moment is still that this is quite a challenging situation in order to get that demand there. And some of the markets are particularly struggling as we go forward. So here you can see the European prices for the pig meat have really dropped away there, particularly in the Netherlands. So sorry for skipping ahead a little bit there. So here you can see the pig population in China that is officially reported and how it has recovered. But recently the sow number has sort of flattened off a bit. It's difficult to say with China exactly how true their figures are. But certainly it's been more challenging in terms of their recovery recently because of the poor profitability they've got there. So yeah, there is some thoughts that this could change a bit going forward. So here's the supply and demand balance for the European market. As I mentioned, in previously and even at the start of this year, we were exporting a lot of pork to China essentially. But as we've come into the second half of the year, it's really fallen away, and there we are. And this is obviously a challenge for the UK as an importer of European pig meat in large volumes. Partly, of course, out of necessity. We don't produce enough pig meat to meet our own demand, and we particularly don't produce enough pork of the cuts that we actually enjoy eating, particularly as consumers in Britain. We don't produce enough loins, we don't produce enough legs for ham and things like that. So we do have to import from Europe. And so when we're seeing price differences this large, that is clearly a drag on the UK price, even if the volumes aren't coming in huge volumes, which so far we only have trade data up to July, and certainly up to July we were not seeing huge volumes of imported pig meat coming in. But when the ability to import that is there and it is low priced, clearly that is something that the market has to be aware of. And if you're a supermarket at the moment, and you're trying to sell meat, when you've got beef and lamb prices, which if you look at beef and lamb prices at the moment, the farm gate prices for beef and lamb are really, really high. So they're struggling with the profits on that red meat, and the general commentary from some of these guys is that they're making a loss on lamb and beef in the retail at the moment. The temptation may be that they want to try and find cheaper sources of things like pork to try and recoup that. So that's something we are facing. Now, I say that at the moment, the latest Pork Watch data does actually show that there's continuing to be good backing of British meat, and really the percentage of British meat versus European meat hasn't changed so much up to September, but that ability remains there, and that is something that does exert a downward pressure on the UK price. So to sum up, obviously we're in a challenging situation. We have faced difficulties with processing capacity. We've got difficulties with export demand and how that was helping us out with some of the other aspects, challenging aspects of demand and processing, but that's not as easy as it once was. And we're facing competition from European meat, which is considerably lower priced than our UK meat at the moment. So really, the outlook is that the British price, in order to try and stimulate the demand and try and make it sort of more an incentive to kill more pigs and sell them in the easiest way possible, it, you know, the outlook is for, unfortunately, for more price declines, which is obviously not particularly palatable at a time that we were already facing a difficulty with profitability because the feed price has been so high. So, you know, the outlook remains challenging at the moment, unfortunately, and certainly the next few months are going to be, you know, a similar picture, unfortunately. So I've just got a few comments now in relation to the in relation to other AHDB activity, just to say, you know, obviously, although it's a sort of, we are facing a difficult situation at the moment, we've got to keep up the kind of long-term aspirations of trying to improve and stimulate demand for meat and pork and keep that reputation there, because we continue to face the background sort of challenges from the environment and the welfare and the people turning away from meat kind of attitudes. So one of the aspects of this is that there's been quite a bit of research we've done lately into making the meat aisle more interesting. So we did quite a good report on looking at why, up to before COVID anyway, before everyone started eating meat again, up to that point when we were seeing decline in people buying meat, a lot of it was due to people not really consciously reducing meat consumption. They just unconsciously were buying less. And people, so we looked at this, and it seems that engagement with the meat aisle was really low. People were not enjoying shopping in the meat aisle. And I think probably a lot of us can agree that the meat aisle is maybe not the most inspiring aisle. Sometimes it's a bit of a mess. I think so anyway, in the supermarkets. So really interesting report we've been looking at to try and help the retailers produce a more inspiring meat aisle and hopefully therefore produce more purchases of our products. So there's an interesting report of that online if anyone wants to have a little browse of that.
Bethan, then, oh sorry, we do have a question in the chat.
Yeah, I was just, yeah.
Okay, have you seen it?
I can't see it, but I will look at it. I did see it pop up.
So it's, how are the European producers able to sustain such a considerably lower price when they have the same feed price as us? And that's from Tom Allen.
So to some extent, they're not, and we've already started to see some exit going on from European producers. We don't have a full EU census yet. Spain is still missing, which is really disappointing of Spain because they're obviously a huge producer of pork and they're not currently supplying their census figures. But the other European countries are generally showing a decline in sow numbers. So that will be depending on what's happened in Spain, because they're big enough to sort of influence the overall picture. If it's similar in Spain too, then we would be expecting to see some decline in European pig production as we come into next year, which will be helpful in terms of rebalancing the market price. But also the European producers have a lower production cost aside from the feed prices. So in terms of other, they're more efficient at producing piglets. Generally, they have better pigs weaned per sow numbers, which will be helpful in terms of the not enough probably to see great profitability, but may mean it's not quite as bad for some of the European guys because they've got some of that greater efficiency for a variety of reasons related to genetics and to some extent differences in legal production systems and common systems and things like that. So yes, we're already seeing decline in some of the European herds, which will be linked to the difficult profitability.
Thank you.
And yeah, this is just to say that we're obviously continuing with our Eat Balanced campaign after the initial run earlier in the year. Just to remind people of continuing to give them permission to eat pork and other meat, and to promote some of the health benefits that have perhaps got a bit lost in some of the messaging that we've had recently about meat and the diet. And I know we've got some stickers in supermarkets. I did come across one in the Co-op by me the other week, reminding me what nutrients we could get from meat, and B12, which is apparently particularly popular with consumers in encouraging them to continue eating meat. So we've obviously got this activity ongoing to support long-term trends for meat industry. So, you know, we're continuing to plug away at that, which is always good to see. That's it. That is it from me. So if we've got any more questions, you are welcome to fire away.
Alan's been typing. Ah, it's just come through.
Hang on, let me just, I'll stop sharing and then I can hopefully see the conversation better. High feed price, different relationship on Chinese meat prices. Are feed prices helping to maintain high meat prices in China? So at the moment in China, the producers are really horrendously not profitable. In the pork production in China is not profitable at the moment, which is, as I mentioned, one of the reasons why it may be that we've seen sort of escalated the declining price, because it's fallen, perhaps because we've had some culling, and then that's led to unprofitability, and we've had more culling and therefore had even more of a spike in production. So the Chinese pork price at the moment is actually not high, which is you know, so that's not in terms of other proteins in China. Beef and lamb is still quite high because the demand for that is sort of intrinsically growing, possibly to some extent because they've not had much access to pork over the past few years, and they've started eating more beef, which is traditionally not something eaten that much in China, and found that they quite like it, and so there's more of that sort of consumption going on. Anyway, so I'm not sure that it does particularly have a different relationship in China, because I think it is still difficult at the moment for the Chinese producers. It's not enough to prop up the price to the point that it's profitable to produce pigs there right now.
Do we have any other messages? Any other questions? Doesn't look like it. So if you do have any further questions, or you can think of any tomorrow, feel free to get in touch and I will pass them on to the relevant people and we'll get back to you with an answer. Up and coming events from early November through to early December, we'll be having a round of face-to-face pig clubs again, starting in the Midlands on the 8th of November through to Oxford on the 6th of December. And this is going to concentrate on the manual handling and moving, the red tractor requirement. So that should be really interesting. And in the next day or so, I will be sending out a feedback form. So if you could just spend 5 minutes to fill it in, it does enable us to try and put pig clubs on on topics that you like or you would like. And that's about it, really. So thank you to Neil and David. That was exceedingly interesting, and it would be nice to think that perhaps some of the producers that were involved tonight may join up on the Monitor Farm programme next year and reap the benefits of what we've learnt this year. So I think if there's no other questions, or is there anything else anyone wants to say on any other topics? I can see someone's typing, so we'll just wait and see what comes up. So is there any sign of any good news, Bethan?
Well, people are still buying pork, so that's, you know, at least the consumer demand is reasonable at the moment, you know, compared to previous years when we were having to keep saying pork demand's going down. At least we don't have that challenge in Britain at the moment.
Okay, it was simply a thank you from Anna and Alan. So I think on the back of that, we'll wish you all a good night and see you before too long. Cheers. Thank you, Bethan. Thank you, David. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.